Today is a very exciting day for me. Today, I have the opportunity to honor an incredible progressive leader whose work has made positive impacts on many causes that embody both Jewish and Christian values. Congresswoman Barbara Lee is a bold changemaker, an inspiring woman, a dear friend, and one of my very favorite members of Congress. She never wavers in her pursuit of peace and justice. Here in the United States, in Israel and Palestine, and across the world. For over 2 decades, Congresswoman Lee has championed diplomacy, coexistence, and humanitarian assistance. She consistently challenges reckless and dangerous efforts to plunge our country into destructive wars and conflicts around the globe. With political courage and steadfast belief in her priorities, the Congresswoman has stood alone. In 2001, she cast the lone vote against congressional authorization to use military force in the so-called War on Terror. At that time, she prophetically warned against the dangers of embarking on an open-ended war. She refused to hand the president a blank check to engage in armed conflict anywhere in the world. Representative Lee has passionately opposed the Iraq War, has stood against U.S. intervention and escalation in the region, and has been a force for peace and the voice of J Street. She championed President Obama's diplomacy with Iran and played a lead role in defending the Iran nuclear agreement. That agreement made both the U.S. and Israel safer without firing a shot. As our current president assembles a dangerous war cabinet, promotes confrontation, and bombed Syria, her visionary leadership underscores the vital role that Congress must play in shaping U.S. foreign policy and in providing a check on the White House. No member of Congress is more knowledgeable and passionate about Israel than she is. Congresswoman Lee has regularly introduced strong legislation supporting 2 states and condemning counterproductive actions on all sides of the conflict. She has gone above and beyond to understand deeply the struggles facing Israelis and Palestinians. From J Street's beginnings, Representative Lee has been an incredible friend and staunch ally for the pro-Israel, pro-peace movement. She's traveled to Israel and Palestine 3 times. I was lucky to be with her twice, with the J Street congressional and leadership delegations. As an ambassador to the Congressional Black Caucus for J Street, she tirelessly conveys the importance of experiencing on-the-ground reality in person firsthand. Her personal advocacy and encouragement has resulted in many, many members of the Congressional Black Caucus joining J Street missions. Congresswoman Lee stands up for what she believes in. She fights the forces of hate, fear, and violence. She works every day to blaze a path to a peaceful, just, and equitable world. Congresswoman Lee is a hero who inspires me to stay committed to activism, or as she would say, to stay woke. On behalf of the entire pro-Israel, pro-peace movement, and on behalf of her many constituents and Berkeley students who are in her district who are here with us today, as co-chair of the J Street PAC and member of the executive board of J Street. It's my great pleasure and honor today to present J Street's 2018 Tzedek V'Shalom, Justice and Peace Award to this deeply deserving Congresswoman, Representative Barbara Lee.
What an honor to have you do it. This is so beautiful. Well, what an honor. Good morning. Let me, first of all, just thank you so much, because this is truly a humbling moment for me. I have to just thank my friend Carol for that really wonderful and spirited introduction, and it's so wonderful to have a close friend introducing me and presenting this beautiful award. Her work, and you know Carol's work with J Street Leadership Forum, and her dedication to peace in the Middle East, that cannot be overstated. And so I am so pleased and thankful to call Carol not only an ally, but a true friend. So Carol, thank you so much for your friendship and for your leadership. Also, I have to thank Jeremy, our fearless leader of J Street. Give Jeremy a round of applause. From day one, I have seen how he has worked, and the team has worked, his staff, the board, to educate members of Congress advocating for peace in the Middle East and throughout the world. It is truly tremendous. Also, I just want to recognize all of our panelists and participants who are going to be with us this weekend, members from the Knesset, to thought leaders and to experts in Washington, D.C. It's really great to join you also on the panel today. It's appropriately titled, Fighting for Our Values, How Americans and Israelis Can Stand Up to the Trump and Netanyahu Agenda, which for me are very similar. Very similar. Also, I just have to recognize my constituents who are here with us today. I think we have one of the largest chapters of J Street. People have traveled all across the country from my district to be here. And of course, I must say that my congressional district continues to be the most progressive and enlightened congressional district in the country, and that's because of my J Street chapter. So thank you. I want to thank all of them for their advocacy and for their presence. And to all of you, it's really a joy to be part of this conference. I think I was at the very first one, and I tell you, it is just amazing to see how J Street has grown and grown and grown. And that's because I think you recognize, and the country recognizes, that you are the voice for today with the vision for tomorrow. So this time, you really are, and that's why you've grown like you have, because you're speaking truth to power. So it sets the stage, this theme, for J Street's 10th anniversary. It's hard to believe, 10 years. Happy birthday and congratulations, J Street. Wow. You've been a force. You've been a force in the community for the past decade. And your goal of building a grassroots movement for peace and justice, it has grown and it has blossomed. And throughout the challenges of these years, J Street has really shared a bold and bright vision of peace throughout the world. And when we get to a two-state solution, which we will, in spite of what we hear, but we will, it will be in large part due to your work, And while the tradition of Jewish peace activism is long, J Street has really transformed and elevated this movement over the last decade. And so I can't overstate the value of your work. You've been in the forefront of conversations around peace and social justice in the Middle East. Your work has changed the discussion in Washington, D.C., making peace a true possibility and keeping peace, the notion of peace, alive on Capitol Hill. I've worked with J Street, as I said, since its inception, and so I know firsthand how important your work is on the Hill, educating members of Congress like myself. From advocating to secure Israel's future as a democratic homeland of the Jewish people, to promoting justice and inclusion here in America. J Street has been a vision and continues to be a vision for progress. And at a time when our world needs more social justice healers, J Street is embodying this idea of tikkun olam. Tikkun olam. Healing the world. And one of the greatest examples of your work came in 2015 with the Iran deal. As we all know, yes, I have to give you credit for this deal passing. That was a major step for diplomacy, national security, and global peace. But even after the negotiations, the fate of the Iran deal was not certain. And J Street played and continues to play an integral role in protecting this deal and ultimately preventing Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. You worked tirelessly, meeting with representatives, and this was tough, and I know it because I was part of the working group and still part of the group on Capitol Hill to ensure that this deal was not rejected by Congress. Your members, all of you, spent long hours organizing at the grassroots level to ensure that our message of peace went far and wide. And not only did you educate members of Congress and everyday Americans on this, you also showed the nation what it means to be pro-peace and pro-diplomacy. And so your incredible advocacy around the Iran deal made it possible for many members of Congress to support this step toward peace. So thank you for that. Now, unfortunately, President Trump, at every turn, has undercut the Iran deal. His refusal to recertify the deal twice now. That's reckless, it's illogical, and it's dangerous. And with another deadline looming in less than a month now, and with John Bolton over there as National Security Advisor, we need your voices more than ever. More than ever. With your efforts, we can provide not only, yes, a voice for today, but also a vision for tomorrow. And so we have to keep that focus, even with all the challenges we're faced with. And rest assured, in Congress, you have many members supporting you and your work every day. Now, like many of you, my work for peace and justice is really grounded in my faith. And I'm particularly drawn to the Jewish idea of tikkun olam, healing the world. Tikkun olam shares a philosophy with one of my favorite Bible verses in the book of James: faith without works is dead. Both ideas teach us that it is not enough to be a person of faith. Our values must be evident in our actions as well. Sadly, faith without works is dead. And sadly, right now, many people who cloak themselves in religion are really ignoring the most fundamental tenets of most faiths: compassion, love, and peace. compassion, love, and peace. And I have to say, nowhere is this more evident than in our federal government and in Trump's dangerous rhetoric now. And that's why we need J Street's vision more than ever, because this is a dangerous time for our world. Let me be clear now. Those in power, including President Trump, are stoking the flames of xenophobia, racism, and anti-Semitism. None of us will forget the horrors that we saw in Charlottesville last year when Nazis and white supremacists came together in hate. Don't forget that. As an African American woman, I know the deep consequences of institutional and individual racism. Similarly, many of you have experienced the pain of anti-Semitism, and I know it hurts. We must learn from these horrors of history and fight back against those seeking to repeat these terrible mistakes. So this movement requires what is known now as intersectionality and understanding, people of goodwill coming together to fight for peace and fight for justice. In both the Jewish and Christian traditions, the concept of loving thy neighbors as thyself, that also is a central tenet of faith. But right now in the United States and around the world, governments are building walls to keep our neighbors separate. Some of these walls are metaphorical, like the un-American travel ban written by the Trump administration, or Prime Minister Netanyahu's decision to withdraw Israel from its commitment to resettle African migrants. And believe you me, many of us have raised our voices and sent statements and letters about this. And some of these walls are literal, like the one that President Trump is trying to build on the southern border. But J Street's work is about tearing down these walls between neighbors and really building bridges of understanding across cultures and faiths. And I've spent many years, it seems like a lifetime, working for peace in the Middle East. And yes, even when I stood alone, as Carol mentioned, in Congress, people around the country and throughout the world understood that vote, which was against a blank check for any president to go to war. It was a vote for peace and security, and it was against unfettered executive power to use force. We must always seek diplomacy and development and global peace and security before we determine to exercise a military option. We must do that, as we see right now that's taking place with Syria. This president is bent on alienating our allies, pushing us to the brink of war with Iran. And if he's left to his own devices, he will unravel years of diplomatic work that J Street has fought to preserve. And it's not just in Iran. The announcement last year that the United States will be moving our embassy to Israel, that was really an antagonistic step, I think, in the wrong direction. Coupled with the continued settlement growth in Israel, at times it seems that peace may be moving even further out of our grasp. But I know that everyone in this room, I know you've watched the horror now at the violence that's taking place in Gaza. These protests and the ensuing violence have once again shown us the urgent need for peace and security, for a two-state solution, and for Israelis and Palestinians to be able to live with peace, dignity, and security. Every day we see something new that reminds us of what your work is about. And so thank you for sticking with your vision for a two-state solution, because it does represent the best way to ensure that Israel remains a democracy and a national home for the Jewish people. And thanks to your help, you really have kept that on the front burner for us in Congress. In my bill, HRES 226, I know many of you know about it. I introduced it several years ago because I just wanted that policy in the Congress to have legislation supporting a two-state solution to promote Israeli and Palestinian peace. That's how our decisions should be made on these votes that are brought before us. Does it promote a two-state solution and peace or not? And so thanks to your help, we put together a strong whip team with members, and you've got some phenomenal members who have the vision of J Street, like David Price and Jan Schakowsky and many more. You know, they are on it each and every day to help support our efforts on the inside, because we know that we work best when we have a very aggressive inside and outside strategy. So you're building quite a movement on Capitol Hill with many phenomenal members of Congress who embraces the vision for the J Street has really put forward for the last 10 years. Make no mistake, the path to peace, it runs through this room, right here. Right here. Your voices today and your vision for tomorrow really gives me a lot of hope for a more peaceful and empathetic and just world. In just 10 years, 10 years may seem like a long time, but it's really not when you look at the history of the conflict in the Middle East. But in just 10 years, you have changed the conversation on Capitol Hill about the possibility of a two-state solution. In 10 years, your work to build a firewall around the Iran deal, your members are consistent voices for peace and diplomacy, and this is no small feat. And so let me just say in closing how proud I am to see you show up every day in our communities and in the halls of Congress. You are showing your faith through your works, and you are healing the world. And make no mistake, we are, as I said, it's an uphill battle with this current administration, and we could not do any of this without you. All of your organizing in our neighborhoods and in our congressional districts, on college campuses. I understand that there's some UC Berkeley students here with us. Go Bears! My students are phenomenal. They are woke. You know, my millennials remind us to stay woke, as Carol said. And so they're woke. You're woke. And you continue to build a grassroots movement that's felt in the Congress. And we're to succeed, we need both people of goodwill around the world to work for peace, as well as members of Congress, and most importantly, you. That's how we practice tikkun olam. That's how we heal the world. And so together with some of my faith, I know, and our works, we can ensure that our children and grandchildren inherit a more peaceful planet. J Street is certainly a voice for today with a vision for tomorrow. So I want to thank you for this tremendous honor, and really I look forward to our continuing work for peace, for security, and for, yes, justice, because faith without works is dead. Tikkun olam. Thank you very much. May God bless you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our panel, Sarah Lyle, Congresswoman Barbara Lee, Member of Knesset Michal Rosen, Member of Knesset Yoel Hassan, Nancy Hoffman, and Peter Byard.
Good morning. Welcome to this plenary session, and congratulations, Mazel Tov, once again to Congresswoman Lee. This is a crowded panel, and I am excited to hear from all of them, and I'm going to go a little wonky to start, because the title of the panel, Polarized or Galvanized, Progressives in America and in the United States and Israel facing illiberal democracies, speaks to mine and perhaps Peter Beinart's wonky heart, because it addresses something that we thought was settled. At the end of the 80s and the beginning of the 90s, we thought we were seeing the end of history with the rise of liberal democracies and the end of the Cold War. But we're not seeing that. We're actually seeing fragile democracies. We're seeing the democracies that were models wobbling. We're seeing the rise of illiberal democracies in places that we once thought were settled. Of course, we look at it in certain places. You know, there's Hungary with Viktor Orban, and that's very clear. But even in places like France, where Marine Le Pen won 35% of the vote, though she lost, that 35% was unprecedented. And in Germany, we saw the Alternative for Germany, the far-right group, come in third. And here in the United States, we've seen the rise of a certain type of populist leadership, a demonization of the press, questioning of the rule of law, questioning of the judiciary that seems unusual in our modern history. And in Israel as well, we're seeing questioning the press, questioning the judiciary. And what we want to look at on this panel is, what does it mean to face this and be in the opposition? Is there a global progressive answer? Are there conversations that we should be having between each other? And actually, I know we've just heard a great deal from Congresswoman Lee, but her example on 9/11 and her example now is something I wanted to turn to first. I actually wanted to quote from your speech on right after 9/11. You said that September 11th changed the world, which we all knew, and it was in those early days when we were all shocked. Our deepest fears now haunt us, and you said, as we act, let us not become the evil that we deplore. But with that statement, becoming the lone dissenting vote on the authorization to war, you paid a price at that time for isolation. But you've consistently spoken out. And I wanted to quote from the press release that her office issued when she decided to make a statement and not attend the State of the Union this year. You said, since my election to Congress in 1998, that you've attended every State of the Union. But this one you skipped, because this president, you wrote, has not honored or respected the office of the presidency and has shown a total disregard for our democratic institutions, from relentless attacks on the press to outrageous statements that undermine the intelligence community and the Russia investigation and repeated threats to our judicial system. President Trump, you wrote, has launched an all-out assault on our democracy. I'd like you to start this panel off by talking about what it meant to dissent in 2001 and what it means to dissent now and what that looks like and what that leadership means for us today.
Well, thank you very much. And I think and that's a very good question, because one of the real fundamental tenets of our democracy is the right to dissent. And what happened after I voted against, which it was a blank check in 2001, it was 60 words, and all it said was the president is authorized to use force against any nation, individual, organization deemed connected to 9/11, period, ... And I knew that would set the stage for perpetual war. I mean, there was no way I could vote for that. But what happened was, when I voted no, and was the only no vote, all hell broke loose. And the death threats and some of the horrible reaction of people around the country told me one fundamental thing, and that is somehow many people in our own country don't understand what democracy is all about, and that it's okay to say no, or it's okay to debate different points of views, or it's okay to push back on authority. And I was called unpatriotic. I committed an act of treason. I mean, it was terrible. And so I think a lot of what we must do is educate the public about what democracy really means, and that it's okay to organize and to exercise our First Amendment rights, and to not go along to get along if we think something is wrong or unconstitutional. And so yes, it was very difficult. But now, 17 years later, that authorization has been used in a declassified report from the Congressional Research Service over 41 times in places like Yemen, Somalia, Guantanamo, everywhere in the world. And until we repeal it, which I'm trying to do, we're going to have an authorization that any president is going to use force as a first option. Last year, we were able to repeal that in the Appropriations Committee. Democrats and Republicans voted for the repeal, both. But guess what? Speaker Ryan, in the middle of the night, out of a 325-page report coming from the Appropriations Committee, just took it out of the bill in a very undemocratic and underhanded manner. And so, guess what? We're going to do this again, and we will win. We're going to get this done because we're going to get it done. And finally, no, I couldn't go to the State of the Union. I decided I wasn't going to normalize what this administration is involved in their agenda, and I'm not going to do it.
Thank you. MK Hasson, you're in the opposition in Israel, and obviously even just the last few weeks with the refugee question, which I'd like to also throw to MK Rosine, with the current conflagration on the border in Gaza, which we'll get to eventually in this panel, I'm sure. But what does it mean to be in the opposition today, and how has it changed over time? Because what we've seen as well is language has changed. The use of incitement has changed. Tell us a little bit about that, and what does it mean to be in the opposition?
First of all, let's talk about the meaning of democracy in Israel. Something interesting about Israel, you know, Israel is maybe from few countries that from the first day of the establishment of the country start as a democracy, as a democratic state. This is something unique. Most of the countries in the world didn't start as a democratic states. And even with that, we are sitting or living in a situation that for most of the Israeli, or all the Israeli, democracy is obvious. It's something that they don't know something else. This is something that it's the daily life for them. And because of that, maybe because of that, more and more Israelis feel that democracy is something that we can test. And the situation in Israel is that when I am the opposition whip, I need to lead the opposition and to act in front of the coalition. But I don't have, not like you, Congresswoman, you have a Democratic and Republican Party. We have few parties in the coalition and few parties in the opposition. So for me as the opposition, first of all, I have some issues with my parties, with my group, okay? I need to deal with my parties in my opposition group before I start acting in front of the coalition. The situation today in the Knesset is that you are living in a reality that everything became to be more loud. The speeches are more extreme. You find yourself in a situation, for example, in the last few weeks, we had a lot of filibuster in the Knesset. We fight against all kinds of coalition initiatives, and we made a lot of filibuster discussion. So people from the coalition in the Knesset told us, why you need all this time to make speeches? Why you need all this time to speak and all this time to fight? And I told them this is exactly the meaning of opposition. This is exactly the meaning to fight, because we are the opposition. This is the only thing that we have. To shout, to say, to fight, to give speeches. That's what we have. And more Israelis even agree with the politician from the coalition that said, no, the coalition don't need the opposition don't need all this time to speech. They don't need all this filibuster. Filibuster is bad. Is damaging the Knesset or the process of the Knesset to run the country. And this is exactly the thing that we are in front of. To explain the people that to be opposition is first of all what is making making Israel a stronger democratic state.
But Peter, I'm going to throw this one to you. We are in an era where to be in the opposition, either in government or externally as an op-ed writer, is to be subject to a sort of post-truth era, right? We are not always sure of our truth, because when our leaders turn to the news and say, well, the Washington Post is fake news, or Channel 2 in Israel is fake news, or Haaretz is fake news, what happens when traditional means of communication are consistently undermined from the top?
I was thinking, listening to Congresswoman Lee, kind of what the equivalent of her act of bravery in 2011 would be today. Because it's easy now in retrospect to say, oh, you were right? But very, very few people actually, and I bet a lot of people were thinking it privately when you did it, but they didn't have the courage to do so. So I think in terms of kind of part of the way of kind of breaking out of this set of kind of misleading facts that have been created is that very oftentimes, in my experience, progressives in the American Jewish community self-censor themselves. There are things that they think and believe in the privacy of their own hearts and minds that they're too afraid to say. And that's part of that's part of the problem as well. And I think to follow in your example today, especially for those of us in the American Jewish community, means, first of all, acknowledging that this community, the American Jewish community, is knee-deep in anti-Muslim bigotry. That many of the most prominent anti-Muslim bigots in American public life are funded from prominent people in the American Jewish community. I'm talking about Frank Gaffney and Pamela Geller and the Gatestone Institute. We are very deeply implicated in this wave of bigotry which is making life so difficult for Muslims in the United States. I think the second thing is that we need to push American politicians, especially those who are going to run for re-election, to go beyond what Barack Obama did. Barack Obama was willing to rhetorically say that the United States government was against settlements. We need Democratic politicians who are willing to say, if I'm elected president, not 1 cent of U.S. money will go to support the settlement enterprise. And if we have Democratic leaders in Congress, like Chuck Schumer, who will fight against the Democratic president who wants to do that, as Harry Reid did when he betrayed Barack Obama, when Barack Obama did the outlandish thing of suggesting there should be a Palestinian state near the 67 lines, then we need different kind of Democrats in Congress. And the last point is that we have to be willing to talk honestly about Gaza. Gaza, according to the United Nations, will be unlivable by 2020. There is barely any water left. There is barely any electricity. Children are going to school often only 4 hours a day. And that, Hamas bears a fair amount of blame for that? Absolutely. Hamas bears a lot of blame. The Palestinian Authority bears a lot of blame. But you know who else bears blame? The American Jewish community bears blame. Because we have been a critical part of a strategy which has been utterly ineffective in weakening Hamas, but has devastated the people of Gaza. And we need to have politicians and elect politicians who are willing to talk not only about what Israel is doing in a particular moment when people are coming towards the fence, but about a completely different strategy vis-a-vis Gaza. One that actually recognizes that destroying the people of Gaza is not ultimately the best way of moving them towards accepting Israel's right to exist. So to me, that would be living in the spirit of Congresswoman Lee.
Peter Beinart never doesn't come, speaking of double negatives, always comes with a statement. Nancy, where is the role for grassroots? When leadership is leaving us with holes, when there isn't leadership from the top in certain spaces, and when we have to turn again and again to the same congresswomen and men occasionally to step in the void, where's the grassroots, and what are those bridges? What are the bridges that we can make? If Peter is putting the onus on the American Jewish community, what are the bridges between the American Jewish community and Israelis? And where are those progressive spaces? Is there a global progressive conversation taking place?
Thank you for the question. It's a really important question, particularly in front of this audience. I happen to be from an organization that's been making change since 1893. We're 125 years old and we're not going away. And we've been part of every major social movement in this country since then. So we're talking about the suffrage movement, we're talking about the civil rights movement, we're talking about the LGBTQ movement, we're talking about the women's movement, you name it. And I am optimistic because I think what happened to us, and I'll speak both to the United States and to Israel. In Israel, many of you heard Women Wage Peace last night. It's an organization we support. They are unbelievable. I am hopeful when I listen to Women Wage Peace. I am hopeful when I talk to people from Darkenu and Zimam and the grassroots movement of 220,000 people who are pushing for 2 states. I am hopeful that there is a grassroots. Here in the United States, I can honestly say that there was a wake-up call in 2016. I think we had among us, maybe even many people in this room, enormous number of people considered themselves active, liberal Democrats, maybe even progressives, but either who didn't vote or didn't do anything about the election. And I think the Women's March showed a year ago, and then again more recently, for speaking from women, that we're not going to stand idly by, and we're going to take action, and that we're going to engage, and we're going to organize. We're going to organize. And I think there is an opportunity, and we've seen the opportunity of organizations that are coming together. I was a founding member of the Jewish Social Justice Roundtable. We started with 6 Jewish organizations, that's now over 50, that have come together as a grassroots movement from the Jewish perspective. So I'm seeing more and more and more activism, and I think it goes to the heart of what we talked about democracy. And if we remembered de Tocqueville, who warned us in the mid-1800s that the 2 big fears he talked about when he talked about democracy in America, if you remember, was the fear of what he called soft despotism and the tyranny of the majority. And look where we are. So I think we have to let our voices be heard, and I'd like to think that women are going to lead the way.
MK Rosine, I did not mean to leave you to last, but I do want to get into the case of the Eritrean and Sudanese asylum seekers. One of the things we've seen in both countries is a rise of a certain kind of ethno-nationalism and an anxiety about immigration and refugees that has been often described as exploitative. Can you talk a little bit about your role? And you went to Rwanda to investigate the alleged deal, which was never really exposed. It was reported that there was a deal to hand asylum seekers to Rwanda. You actually went there to look. Talk a little bit about this and what this actually connects also as well to the grassroots question. Because in Israel, we did see popular protest against the idea of deportation.
Yes, first of all, thank you. I can talk an hour or two about the issue of asylum seekers in Israel and the refugees, and tomorrow we'll have a panel on this issue, and I invite everyone to talk about. I think when I fight on the issue of asylum seekers, there's a lot of similarity with the fight for Palestinian rights and the 2-state solution. Because at the end, we want Israel to be the home of the Jewish people, but also a democratic state and with equal rights to all of our citizens, and of course, human rights. So I think when we fight all the civil and human rights organizations against expanding the settlement and against the demolition of Palestinian villages in Area C and trying to have still the two-state solution alive, it's the same as fighting for the good solution or the best optional solution of the asylum seekers in Israel. The asylum seekers in Israel from Africa are only 0.4% of the population in Israel. We are a strong economic country, a democracy country, and we can observe this amount of refugees in our country, giving them some kind of social benefits and social rights until they can go back to their countries. And the fact that our country, and I think that's a little bit similarity to what's happening here in the United States, both of our leaders portrayed the Israeli or the American to be just of one religious, one ethnicity, one, even race, and religious in Israel, for example, or even here in America. So I think the fact that they use fear, angry, against strangers, any stranger, there's not different if there are refugees, asylum seekers, or even migrant workers, or if they're Palestinians, citizen or not citizen of Israel. So I think the way that we behave through minorities in Israel, it's the same way we behave to the Palestinian behind the Green Line, and the same way we behave to the asylum seekers, the refugees that come into us to look for a safe haven. So I think there's a thin line going, and it's not just in Israel, also in the United States, also all in Europe. You gave example, we can talk about Poland, Hungary, Italy, a lot of places, and we see how those leaders take advantage of the migrant crisis. It's a crisis, we need to face it, but they take advantage of it, to be more nationalistic, more full of hate and reject the other. So I think there's a thin line that's why I promote the issue of the asylum seekers. And I went with another member of Merritt's party, Mossi Raz. We went together to Rwanda and to Uganda to speak with the international and local refugees organization and to ask them if there will be a deportation from Israel to the asylum seekers from Africa to Rwanda or Uganda, will they have any chance to work, any chance to stay there for years? Do they have any legal status? And what we find out, and came back to talk with the media in Israel and to tell the public that the government is lying. Is lying to the people, is lying to the Supreme Court, saying that we achieve the best agreement, they will have a legal status, they can be refugee, and all of that. And we find out that they will not be legal, they are illegal, they are transparent, they will have no rights. If something happened to them, they cannot go to the police because they are illegal. And if they're caught on the border or something like that, they will go to prison or even more worse. And most of them that already been deported from Israel to Rwanda or Uganda find themselves moving on with the refugees path, going back to Libya, finding themselves in the slave market, trying to get a ship to Europe. Some succeeded, but some dead on the way. And then maybe they come back to Uganda and they will recognize as refugees. So anyway, everyone told us, don't let them come here. It's unsafe to them, it's dangerous, they are illegal, and please prevent it. We came back to Israel and we did that. And unfortunately, Netanyahu didn't give me and Mossi Raz the credit. He said it's the NIF did it. Of course, it's a lie, but that's the truth.
I think you can live without the credit of Netanyahu.
Yes.
And survive.
Thank you.
MK Hassan, when we spoke on the phone a week ago, you mentioned how social media has changed the political landscape in Israel the same as it has in America. And you spoke a bit about some of the changes that Netanyahu has made. Can you talk a bit about what you would have done in this situation if you were in power. Where would you have taken this situation with the refugees? And also, what is that influence? What is changing? How has it changed leadership? And what is it doing to democracy?
About the refugees, I think the big mistake that the Israeli government did, and actually it's not only Netanyahu government, even start from the Olmert government, that all the people coming and getting into Israel, is the fact that from the beginning we didn't really start the process to understand exactly who is refugees and who is not a refugee. And I think if from the beginning we are starting all this process, I think today we've been in a better situation, in different situation. And for now, I must say that, it was very funny. I remember when the Prime Minister declared his first plan how to deal with this problem, I remember I'd been in my car and I was so surprised from the Netanyahu declares about that and what he said. And I said, this is Netanyahu? This is the Prime Minister? I was not really sure. I said, okay, I need to tweet now. I need to say that I support what he said. So I wanted to start to tweet, and I said, okay,
wait a second.
Still Netanyahu. Let's wait. Let's wait. Maybe 1 hour, 2 hours. Let's wait to see. Maybe something happened. I don't know. And even me, that I'm young, but I have experience in politics, I was not so prepared at what happened a few hours after, okay? And the story about the refugees and the other issue, two-state solution, all that, is the fact that actually the right wing in Israel took themselves the fact or the reality that they are actually the patriot. They are the patriot, they are the group that care about Israel, and the others not. I don't accept that. I'm actually fighting against that all the time. I think to be a patriot today is to make sure that we are going to two-state solution and coming back to the negotiation with the Palestinians. This is the meaning of to be patriot. Because if you are not doing that, you're putting in a risk the existence of Israel as a Jewish democratic state. And this is actually what we want. We want to create homeland for the Jewish people, safe and strong. And thank God Israel is a very strong country. And you know something else that's interesting? When our father established Israel, when they write the Megillat Ha'atzmaut, how you say it?
Independence.
Declaration of Independence.
Declaration of Independence.
Declaration. Yeah. When they wrote it, okay, it was so liberal, so open, so putting a chance to minorities and to all the groups in Israel. And when they wrote this amazing paper, when Israel was in the weakened situation that you can even imagine. Small country, very weak.
At war.
Few months ago, I took this paper, this historical paper, and I asked the member of Knesset in Israel to sign again on this paper. When Israel is so strong, with a strong army, economy, technology, high-tech, everything. Very stable country. Maybe 55 MKs was agreed to sign. Maybe. And this is show what happened to us. And this is also show that we have a lot of things to do. And first of all, convince the Israeli people, we are the opposition, that we are not less patriot than the others, that we are care about Israel, that we can run Israel better than them for sure, and keep the important security interests of Israel. And also, and very important, and it's a very new issue in the Israeli agenda, keeping strongly the democracy in Israel.
Can I
Nancy, you can.
I want to follow up because that Declaration of Independence of yours that came 242 years after ours, and ours was also pretty liberal, except yours did mention sex as one of the freedoms that ours didn't, nor did our Constitution, nor have we since. Yeah. But just a footnote. I do want to mention, though, that language is important. And in your Declaration of Independence, you talked about the Jewish immigration, but also the ingathering of the exiles and a state of all of her inhabitants. I think that includes refugees. In ours, we talked about the consent of the governed, and we talked about that when that we no longer have that, it's up to the people to then change the government. And so we have this, and language is really important in all this. When it comes to the refugees, I think the law that you passed was mistananim, is that right? Infiltrators?
Infiltrators.
Yeah. Infiltrators. What our government...
Coming back to the Arabs coming from Jordan to attack Israel.
So you talk about infiltrators. Our leaders, some of them, talk about illegal aliens. And I think we really have, as we talk about illiberal democracy, we really have to go to those core documents that were brilliant. They were done by our founding fathers in both cases, and they were all fathers, but they were brilliant documents. And I think that that language makes a difference. Next week, our Supreme Court, and the courts make a difference, by the way, our Supreme Court, a week from Wednesday, is going to start oral arguments in the anti-Muslim ban. And those of you in the D.C. area, I hope you'll join us in the steps of the Supreme Court to speak out against the ban. But there's so many similarities that are going back and forth on between the two of the strongest democracies in the world. So what is that? And that's where we come back, Sarah, to the grassroots and the importance and the power of everyone in this room and the power of the grassroots in both Israel and the United States.
Michal, I know you want to follow up, but I want to turn to something. Congresswoman Lee, you have been a consistent supporter for the two-state solution, and now we've heard it from more than one of these panelists, the two-state solution. But we now have an administration that recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and is planning to move the embassy. We have an administration that has changed the language that has been used consistently for the last 25 years about the settlements, questioning whether or not they're an obstacle to peace. What is the role now of the United States? Have we lost our role as independent moderator of a potential peace process? And if we look at Jerusalem, what can you do from Congress at this moment to advance a two-state solution with the administration moving in that direction? And I'm going to start with you, and I'd like Peter to pick that up, because I'd like you both, and Michal as well, to look at how Trump himself has changed Israeli politics and what role we're playing in that context as well.
I think taking this unilateral action to move the embassy to Jerusalem was a grave mistake. I think it undermines, first of all, the peace process. It also signals to me that they're really not serious about a two-state solution. Because, as I think Donald Trump said, that he wanted to take this off of the table before we could move forward on any two-state solution or peace process. Well, how do you take that off of the table when, in fact, that is key? Jerusalem, in terms of the embassy and in terms of the United States' role in being part of a process that would lead ultimately to a two-state solution. So if you take that off of the table, and this has been policy, U.S. policy, forever, because we knew that this had to be negotiated and had to be part of an overall comprehensive plan. So I worry tremendously that this does, once again, first signal that they don't believe that a two-state solution is viable or should not be the ultimate outcome of our involvement. And then secondly, it signals to me that we are not going to be viable in this process as, I won't even say now, a honest broker, just as part of the overall legitimate process to try to seek a two-state solution. So I'm troubled by that tremendously. And what Congress can do, I would love to see legislation passed to say no to this. But of course that means changing the dynamics in terms of the Congress and who we elect to Congress, which, of course, grassroots organizing in J Street is very critical in achieving. But it was a mistake, and I've read some of the polls that said, 20% of Jewish Americans think that unilaterally making this move was not the correct move to make. And so I hope we can build more groundswell support to at least make a strong statement that even if this happens, that somehow we've got to get back to the negotiating table, because I'm tremendously worried, and like I said, I think it was a big, big mistake.
Peter?
Look, I think Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand, which is to say that the Israeli government, there was always this argument in the American Jewish community that if you simply reassured the Israeli government more and more and more, then it would become more and more willing to move towards the two-state solution. We've seen, in fact, that that's been fundamentally, profoundly disproved, right? That the Israeli government is, and I think, frankly, it would probably be the same case even in a more centrist Israeli government, will be satisfied with the status quo. The only way to move the Israeli government from the status quo is by pressure. There's destructive pressure and there's constructive pressure, right? The pressure has to be nonviolent, should be in support of Israel's right to exist. But the notion that simply giving the Netanyahu government more and more, right, basically saying, on this Jerusalem move, and we've seen what Netanyahu does, right? It's just been an acceleration of the settlement process. I think that the discourse of the two-state solution is fading. And there's a very wide generational chasm on the left and among Americans, among Palestinians, and among American Jews. I am deeply invested in a two-state solution. I think it's the most practical outcome. I also believe, as a Jew in a post-Holocaust world, that I do want there to be one country in the world that has a special responsibility for the protection of Jewish life. But I will tell you that when I talk to younger people, if they become convinced that what is on offer is one state, that they will move towards saying the fundamental issue for us is basic human rights. And if we cannot secure basic human rights for Palestinian people in a two-state solution because the Israeli government, through its settlement actions with the support of the American Jewish community, has made that impossible, then you want to have a debate about one-state solution? We'll have a debate about one-state solution. We will support one secular binational state with equal rights for all. That's not my view, but when that horse leaves the barn on the American left, it will be very, very powerful. And we are closer and closer to that tipping point. I don't know when it will come, but we're ever closer to that tipping point in which people will say, if we have to have one state solution, I have very little doubt that a very large percentage of younger American Jews and younger Americans in general will choose what they see as human rights and equality, even if it means the end of the Zionist dream.
Michal, you were Michal, and then MK Hassan.
Okay, I want to respond, and I will start with a say. There's a say that when the wind of change blows, you can either become a windmill or become a windbreaker. If it's a good change, so you have to channel the wind to do the best of it. But if it's a bad wind, like we experience, you should be the best windbreaker you could be. And I think that we are not brave enough. And we are not fighting this fight together, to collaborate together, progressive and liberal in Israel, in the United States, together to fight that wind change and bad wind change. And I think, for example, there are a few things we need to do together. It's not enough just to talk about the two-state solution and put it on the shelf like this is the ideal and we want to get there. We need to talk all the time and to raise awareness to what happens in the sea area, especially in the West Bank. The Israeli doesn't know, the American doesn't know. J Street doing, the youth of J Street doing an amazing program, yes, with the sea area. Nobody talks about the annexation attempts of the government. Nobody talks about the government trying to make Area C a Jew-all area without Palestinians, trying to push them away from Area C to Area B and A, and then they can say, you know what? Area C, 60% of the West Bank, only Jews living there, no Palestinians, so we can annex the area. We have to talk about it. We are not talking about it, not in the Knesset, not everyone, maybe only one party or two parties in the Knesset, in the opposition. We have to talk about Gaza. We withdraw from Gaza and created the biggest prison in the world. And this is our responsibility. And we have to talk about Gaza. And we have to talk about Gaza even in a very, very delicate and, you know what, difficult time to talk about it. And Barbara, you talked about it after the 9/11. During the Protective Edge war, Merritt was the only one running from one media platform to another to speak about against the military escalation, about against the military combat getting inside Gaza, and also now the March of Return now in Gaza. The only one that spoke against it is Merritt's party. We need to speak against what's going on. We need to ask questions the government before, during, and after, and not to be silent by the government. Also, we need to fight against the attempt to silence the civil and human rights organization, especially the one that is fighting against the occupation and promote the two-state solution. We need to be there. We need to align with B'Tselem and breaking the silence and Peace Now and all this organization and Women Wage Peace. We need to be there for them and to fight. Even when it's hard, even though sometimes they say things that not everybody agreed, but we need to fight for the rights to say all of that. That's democracy. And of course we need to fight to save our Supreme Court independent, the free media, of course protect Israeli, Palestinian citizens and residents like East Jerusalem residents and refugees and asylum seekers. We need to be in all these fights. We can't be picky. We can't say we will talk about the two-state solution, but Gaza is another issue. We will talk about Gaza, about refugees, that's another issue. We need to understand that's the whole picture, and we need to have ideology, a full ideology, an alternative to Netanyahu, not to be a wannabe Netanyahu like some of the opposition party. We need to change. Not you.
Yeah.
Not you.
I
You're
just
for
want
the
to
good guys.
interject right here.
So,
if we don't
yep.
do this, especially in our own country, given what is being said, and given Netanyahu and Donald Trump's lack of clarity or commitment to a two-state solution, what's happening here is you're giving fuel to the BDS movement. And so we have to speak out loudly and clearly and more aggressively why we want and need a two-state solution before the time is lost, because this is a defining moment.
But we need leadership. We need leadership at the top. And I think one of the
we are all leaders.
No,
all of us.
We are all leaders.
Don't wait for the leader. Just
Michal, we're all leaders, but we have a problem. We have a problem, and it's called it's with the V word. We have the power of the vote. We're talking about democracy. We're talking about, you know, the importance of democracy. We have the power to vote. And in this country, we have an important election coming up in November. The midterm elections are going to be critically important.
And Gerazon, sorry.
Actually, the situation in the Middle East today is that we need to deal with the moderate and the extremists. It's not only by the extremists that are dealing with terror and all that. I'm going to say something about them later. I'm going to speak about the extremists that we have in Israel and in the Palestinian Authority, groups that pushing from different reasons and different interests, pushing to one-state solution. If you go today in the Palestinian Authority, you meet more and more Palestinians that saying very clearly, very openly, we don't want two-state solution anymore. We have patience, we can wait. One day it's going to be one state. We're going to live together. And the meaning of to live together for us, for all of us, is one day, maybe, because it's a democratic state, to losing our majority, our Jewish majority, or maybe losing Israel as the way that we know her. So the question that we ask today is how you deal with this in the front of the Israeli people. Most of the Israeli people still believe in the two-state solution. But on the other hand, when you ask them, do you believe that we have a chance to achieve it? Or do you believe that we have a partner? Even bigger majority said, I don't believe. I don't believe we have a partner. And then to try to explain them that the fact that we don't have a partner, if we can call it like that, it's our problem. Peace, two-state solution, it's our problem. It's not we are doing favor to the Palestinians. This is really our problem. And trust me, it's very difficult to explain it today because of the situation. And you know, you spoke about Trump declaration about Jerusalem and moving the embassy to Jerusalem. I not agree with you. I support that. I support that. I think it was a good decision. Because Jerusalem is the capital of the state of Israel forever. Nobody said, what is Jerusalem? Nobody said, what is Jerusalem? Because still, if you take the issue of Jerusalem and disconnected from the old Jerusalem that unite with the Israeli Jerusalem, the Jordanian Jerusalem, you have so many Palestinian villages that inside Jerusalem today that everyone knows this is not part of Jerusalem. So the decision, it was good. But the question, if it's going to be a second step, if it's going to be a peace initiative that coming from Trump administration. And this is the question. And when it's going to be a peace initiative, and I want to be optimistic that they're actually working on that. And I have some information that they are doing that. I don't know if finally they're going to declare it. I don't know. Maybe finally they're not going to do it. But I know that they are working about some paper. The question is what the Israeli government going to say and what also the Palestinian leadership are going to say. And if they're going to say yes, just to go back to the room and to the table and to negotiate again. Even without discussing the detail now, just coming back and discuss. And this is, I think, the main issue. And maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, maybe the fact that they're actually moving the embassy or putting the issue again on the table, maybe this is what's going to lead to a change. Because what happened now with the Gulf states, it's not something that we need to take it as a small issue. Something happened there. And it's not because of Israel. It's because they understand that if they are not going to be part of a normal coalition, the reality finally going to be like Syria and Iraq. And they want to fight against the extremists, against the terrorists. They want to fight and they need coalition for that. Israel part of that, United States can be part of that, and Europe also. And this can maybe make the change. And finally, it's important to say, I know, and we know our people, we know the Israeli people. And you know, I can say something that I never said in public before. We said it to Prime Minister Netanyahu once. We said to him, if you're going to bring a peace agreement that includes a lot of compromise with the Palestinians, but in the other side, bring peace agreement with 8 or 9 Arab countries in the Middle East, we're telling you that you're going to got 70% support of the Israeli people, and you know that. And Netanyahu knows that. The problem with Netanyahu is that he's not ready to pay the price about the Palestinian issue. Because he's afraid from his political base, he's afraid to losing his voters, his basic voters, and going to these historical options that is on the table today. And it's tragedy that we are not there now.
Did you have a comment for that?
No, I just want to say it's the same with the refugees agreement with the UN. The same. He knows that that's the best plan. He doesn't have an agreement with Rwanda or Uganda to deport by force the refugees. He knows that even if they had the agreement, they had less refugees, asylum seekers, living from Israel to the third country than to Europe by the agreement with the UN. He knows everything. He doesn't care about that. That's our problem. We have, I tweeted, by the way, and I said, we have a Michigan prime minister. That's what they have.
Yeah, but what?
You need to know that your leader, whatever his ideology, whatever is from where he comes, what his values is consistent. He knows what he's doing.
You mean like our leader? You mean like our
leader? Exactly. So that's our main problem. We don't have a stability. Democracy needs stability. You need to know what your prime minister will do tomorrow morning, and you need to feel as the best as you can that in his mind and his way of thinking, he's doing the best for your country. And that's not reality today. That's unfortunately not the reality.
Peter, yeah.
I just wanted to say something about the two-state solution, and I hope, Member Kudl Hasson, you're right. But I think it's important to recognize the two-state solution is a means to an end. That end is an Israel that can remain a homeland for the Jewish people and Palestinians who live with rights and dignity. I think one of the dangers we face, and this is certainly true in some kind of Trump peace plan, is that essentially, you basically say, yeah, Palestinians can have 50% of the West Bank. Basically, we'll give them area A and B, no capital in Jerusalem, and we're going to keep Israeli troops on the Jordan Valley and have nothing to do with Gaza, and no recognition, no even discussion about any moral responsibility or recognition for the right of return. And if you want to call that a state, go ahead. Call it an empire for all we're concerned. Right?
That will be his plan?
That will be... No, but I know that Benjamin Netanyahu has basically floated proposals for basically the Palestinians having glorified autonomy on 50% of the West Bank, basically areas in A and B, going back to his early political career in the 1990s. And I think that the Trump administration, given that it is heavily influenced by people like John Bolton, who does not support a two-state solution at all, and has no input from Palestinians whatsoever, but basically has a bunch of Jewish former business partners and relatives of Donald Trump, is likely, I think, to possibly, it's important to say that when people talk about the two-state solution, we're talking about a viable Palestinian state. That means it has to have a capital in Jerusalem, because having a Palestinian state without a capital in Jerusalem is like creating a country in Westchester that can't get into Manhattan. It means that you cannot be virtually bisected by the settlement of Ariel, which stretches halfway through the West Bank. It means it cannot have Israeli troops permanently on 25% of the West Bank, which is Jordan. And it means that it cannot pretend that the Palestinian refugee issue does not exist. Right? I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong, but I think it's important.
Because you can ask after that Tzipi Livni, that she's going to be here, of course, and she made some negotiation with the Palestinians, and most of the things that you said even don't demand by the Palestinians, okay?
What do you mean?
I mean that the fact that you spoke about 50%, nobody spoke about 50% of the West Bank.
That's been Netanyahu's plan since the 1990s.
Spoke about
he explicitly said
everyone knows exactly, of course, Netanyahu, that this is nothing that can even pass in any situation. But I don't want to, now I'm not speaking in the name of Netanyahu, but I want to say something about Gaza and about Hamas. And this is something that's important to say to all of us, that we are strong believers in peace process, in two-state solution and everything. We need to be very clear about Hamas. Hamas is one of the main obstacles for peace. You should know that. Hamas is a terror organization that killed more than Palestinians than Israelis. Even now, in the time that we are talking, they're killing Palestinians. They have a full responsibility to the situation in Gaza. And you know that Abu Mazen and the leadership in the Palestinian Authority are strongly influenced from Hamas and from the political fight that they have between each other. If we really believe in peace, we need to be very clear about the fact you want to be a party, Hamas want to be a party, stop being a terror organization. You cannot be a party and a terror organization. I'm not choosing the Palestinian leadership, I'm not. But if you want to be a prime minister, you cannot be a prime minister in the day and in the night to be a terrorist. It's not working like that. And if we love peace, and if we believe in peace, we need to be very clear about this point. Sorry? And you know what? You said something about Netanyahu. I'm telling you, Netanyahu in 2009, he said when he wanted to be elected to prime minister first time, he said, I'm going to be strong in the front Hamas. He's one of the weakest governments in the front of Hamas. A very weak government. They don't really know how to deal with Hamas as a terror organization. The government before them did a better job. And I'm telling you, again, if we believe in peace, and if we want to change the reality in the Middle East, we need to speak with the moderate, we need to work with the moderate, but we need to fight against the extremists.
Instead, we're talking with Hamas and having agreement with Hamas and calling Abu Mazen a terrorist. And not talking with him. So.
I'm against talking with them.
Right. The Israeli government has helped Hamas tremendously by discrediting those Palestinian leaders. Right? I mean, look at what Salam Fayyad said when he left politics in an interview with Roger Cohen. He basically said, I made a bet on security cooperation with Israel, on fighting corruption, and on the two-state solution, and I was made to look like a fool by the Israeli government because they kept on building settlements and moving people towards Hamas. So you want to fight against Hamas. I agree, Hamas represents a set of ideals that I think everyone on this panel utterly disagrees with. You have to make winners of those Palestinians who support nonviolence and are willing to support live alongside them.
I agree.
We're probably not going to find the solution in the next 25 seconds. But it does speak to the fact that these issues are so entwined.
You know, it's not academic discussion. We are politicians.
I feel like I'm getting a small example
most of
what
us.
it would be like to be an MK. It's I like it. But we do have to stop, unfortunately. We are very much at time, and I very much appreciate all of my incredible panel, which could go on for another 2 hours. You are all welcome to stay with us. Nancy Kaufman, M.K. Hasson, Congresswoman Lee, Peter Beinart, M.K. Rosin. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.